Hey LinkedIn. Earlier today, I made a post about how I think I know the custom objects are the most powerful tool in the HubSpot CRM. And I really think it's an underutilized feature. I don't think we talk about this strategy enough. I don't think operations professionals give enough room to be creative and to experiment with the custom objects tool. There's definitely always going to be common use cases to use it for, but I think that it's at its most powerful when you're using it for unique to solve for unique instances. Whether that be for one-off instances to solve because there's, some problem that you're encountering in this example we'll go over that you need to fix, or if it's actually a part of your data model and you need to get that built into your HubSpot instance. Like we need to really promote creativity and exploration around the custom object tool in HubSpot because there's tremendous amount of opportunity. And when you actually start to see what you can do with this, it empowers you to build a incredibly sophisticated instance. So in this example, I'm actually going to go over a live portal example for one of my clients, but I'm not going to give any information about the client. And I went through the entire flow, and there's no information about the client in the flow. So I feel like this one is actually pretty safe to go over. So in this example, the client is one of the largest indoor facilities for like sports and things like that. We'll say in this example, it's basketball. So it's one of the largest indoor basketball facilities in the world. And they have leagues programs. There's franchise locations all around the country where there's different basketball gyms. Each of those gyms have their own league, and we've created a custom object inside of HubSpot to represent the league and the league games and things like that. So it's actually the league games come in as deal objects. So those will be represented. Each game gets its own individual deal object itself. And what happened was we created enrollment logic to send game reminders one day in advance of the game for the upcoming game that they have, right? And it's going to say, hey, first name, you have an upcoming game and then it would list the day and time. The appointment start time is what it's called in that SMS message. And they would be able to see what time they need to come into the gym. So one of the things that we didn't notice that was going to happen was once we turned this automation on, the deal, like there could be on one particular contact could be associated with up to like 5 deals and have 5 different games in that next day. So one of the things that we didn't realize that was going to happen before we turned this on was that in that instance, that person is going to receive 5 different SMS messages. Because how we originally had this set up, and it makes sense, would be to just have, for every time the deal came down to send out an SMS. So every single one of those deals, all 5 of them would have triggered this workflow. They would have come down as separate individual objects and would have triggered that SMS to send 5 different times, which obviously is not good for the customer. So what do? We came back to the drawing board and we said, how can we solve for this? Really didn't need any direction from the client. I knew what the path forward was and I just started building. So I knew that we needed a custom object because really there's 2 use cases for a custom object. One, you're going to use a custom object to model some kind of data point for a relationship that your business has that isn't modeled by a standard object. Contacts, companies, deals, tickets. For example, you're a veterinarian. Veterinarians have pets. You're not going to be able to store a pet as any of those standard object records. So you need to create a new custom object to represent the pet. It's one use case, common use case. The second one would be to store static information that's not to be overwritten. So this would be an example of that second use case that we want to use. We need to create a custom object in this example to store all of those different times so that we can deliver it in one single SMS message. So how do we do that? We start off on the deal object itself because that's where all the data originally is going to live. We're not going to worry about this custom code action. The purpose of this action is because all of the data maps over from an external system in batch. When that happens, all of these deals can trigger to come down to the workflow at the same exact time. What happens is they would then all enter the second workflow, which I'll show you, at the same exact time because the final action here is to enroll them in part 2. So what happens is if they all come down at the same time, they're all enrolled in part 2 at the same time, and that breaks that workflow's logic. So in order to circumvent that, what we did is we have every single one of these deals go through a custom coded action. There may be a better solution than that. That's the one that I came up with. None of them can, two deals can't exit that custom coded workflow action at the same time. They then go into this 1 minute delay, which means that all of them will exit the workflow at different points in time, which solves that problem. So if the appointment start time is less than 1 day from now, the appointment has not been canceled, and this, for testing purposes, we created a test pipeline. Because this was SMS, triggers an SMS message, we had to do it in the production portal. So we wait 1 minute. After all the deals come down this workflow, essentially what we're doing is just, the purpose of part 1 is to make sure that the deals don't enter the second workflow all at the same time. So the final action is to enroll them in part 2. Part 2 has no triggers set because all of these deals would be enrolled from the previous workflow. And again, this is a deal-based workflow. So we're still working off that original object that was being mapped from that external system, which is deals, which represent every individual game. What we're doing here is we are looking to see whether or not, so we created these contact properties for game 1 all the way up through 15, right? So we built it. Typically there was nobody who had more than 5 games, but we built it all the way up to 15 games. Just in case we needed to store that many, we wanted more than enough to know that we would never have an instance where somebody could go beyond what we've built for. So we did that up to 15 times. So on the contact property, or on the contact object, you can see we are setting the contact property, league reminder, game 1 of the associated contacts, and we're setting that on the deal property, based on the deal property appointment start time text. So what's going to happen is, let's say deal 1 comes down the first workflow, goes through that custom coded action. It's then triggered to come down this workflow. What it's going to do is it's going to check game 1. It's going to say, first, is game 1 unknown? If game 1's unknown, this is the first time that context has ever come through this flow, so we know we can just write that value. Or if game 1 is known, but it has not been updated in the last 1 day, then we know that that value is from the previous time they came down, and we need to overwrite that value. So the contact properties that we created were created to be overwritten, to be passed off into a custom object where they can't be overwritten. So that's what we're doing here. And say the first deal comes down, it checks the associated contact. That contact's, let's just say the game 1's unknown, it's going to write that value. Then the second deal comes down. It's going to say, okay, game 1 is known. We just wrote that property, but game 1 was updated within the last 1 day. So that fails. It goes down the none met branch, and then it checks for game 2. It's going to say, is game 2 unknown? In this instance, let's say yes, game 2 is unknown. It's going to write that value to the contact for league reminder game 2 for the appointment start time text. It's going to do that for game 3, game 4, all the way up to 15 games. So, and this is a descending if-then branch. Is what I call these. All right, so we had the deals. All of our different deals came down. It populated onto these contact properties. Then we have part 3. So what is part 3? It's a contact-based workflow. So we started on the deal object. We have now passed all of those appointment start time texts for every single game that's in the next day onto contact properties, which are constantly overwritten because people are going to constantly have new games. So those are supposed to be overwritten. So we have here contact enrollment trigger that league reminder game 1 is known. That's also a re-enrollment trigger. So if every time that becomes re-known, so every time that property is updated, it will trigger this flow to reoccur, right? So that would have happened on the very first action or if-then branch here. This is populated, triggers this flow, and then we give it 5 minutes. Why do we give it 5 minutes? It needs time for all of the properties to make their way. If you have up to 15 games, game 1 triggers. Well, we need to give the rest, the other 14 games time to make it through the workflow. And we set a date stamp for date enrolled and league game reminders. And then we create a custom object, right? So we already created the custom object. It's all set up in the portal. We're creating this record as an action. The reason why we set this date stamp is because we're saying game reminder is the nomenclature or naming convention for this custom object. Then we're using contact properties to personalize that. So we're going to say game reminder for email. We have this separator, and then date enrolled in the lead game reminder. So you can look them up by email as well as by when they were enrolled in this workflow. Don't worry about the association label. That's not a real association label. It's just used for some back-end stuff. So we're going to copy over first name. Obviously, we need first name for personalization. We also need, or to send out that SMS, we also need their phone number as well. So we'll copy that over. You can see that here at the bottom somewhere, I'm sure. Yeah, phone number as well as their last location, because this is a franchise. They have centers, or whatever you want to call it, gymnasiums all over the country or all over the world. So you would also need to know what their last location was. And then we're going to copy over all of those values. So we have, again, here we're looking at the actual custom object properties. So we have game 1 all the way through game 15, and we're copying that value that we have on the contact property, which was written in the previous workflow, over to those values that we have as properties on that custom object. What that does is those values now can never be overwritten, right? Every time league reminder game 1 is known, which is every time a deal comes right back down this flow and then writes them over to the contact, it's going to create a new game reminder record. So let's say they had 3 days in a week where there was a game. Each one of those days is going to create its own custom object and is going to store the games that they have in that next 24 hours to send the SMS, right? So we've passed all those values now off to a custom object. Then what do? Part 4, we have a custom object-based workflow based on league game reminders. So that's our custom object that we've created. It's saying object create date time is less than 1 day ago. Game 1 is known, because at a minimum, we need them to have at least one game in order to fire off an SMS. Association label, again, that's not a real association label, is any of active. So then what we're going to do is we're going to check how many games does this person have. And what you would do is, if it's a 1 game reminder, game 1 would be known, game 2 would be unknown. If it's a 2 game reminder, game 1, game 2 is known, game 3 is unknown. 3 game reminder, the pattern is just going to continue to repeat itself all the way up to 15 games. So 15 games would look like this. Game 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15 are known. 14 would be everything up to 14 is known, game 15 is unknown. Then each of these would then branch off on an if-then branch. We have game 1 all the way through game 15 reminder, and then each of those gets their own individual workflows as well. Why does every single one of those need to get their own workflows? It's because the SMS inside of that would then trigger. The reason why I didn't just send the SMS here, because you could do that, is because there's also location branching. So to have location branching on top of this 15 branched if-then branch would be an impossible number of variables to take into consideration in a single flow. So I then broke these out now into individual flows for game 1 all the way through game 15. And the only difference is in the workflow that was created for game 1, we're going to give them we're going to send in that SMS, we're just going to send them the game 1. And the personalization token is just going to include game 1. If it's a 2 game reminder, we're going to give them game 1 and game 2. 3 game reminder, game 1, 2, 3, all the way up to, if they had 15 games, it's going to give them all 15 games in that single SMS. So that's how you can create really cool, badass implementation using a custom object. This is just one example. There's so much opportunity, so much room to test these things out, to find unique and innovative ways to use the custom object. Just go and try and implement, test, experiment. Do not be afraid to fail. This flow that we created, while it is complex, it's necessary, and it was discovered through failure. Like, we turned on the automation, contacts got spammed with SMS, we came back, we rebuilt the system, and now we've re-engineered it so that there is no customer-facing issues. And it's going to be a really beautiful, seamless flow when we get this project relaunched. So just wanted to give you a little bit of peek behind the curtain. Like, these are the things that I'm working on that I really don't get to show too often. So I hope everybody found this valuable and insightful to see what you can do with HubSpot custom objects. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.